Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we're privileged to have with us Thomas Frey with the DaVinci Institute. Welcome to the program, Thomas.
Well, thanks for having me on, Mike.
Hey, so I always love when we can talk about futuristic things in the sense of way back in the day, you've got, mega trends and that kind of set the stage for some things to look toward. And in some ways, I'm sure that we can sort of self-create our own future when we think about what could happen. So kind of give us your background and why you're called the, Futuristic Speaker and why you focus on those types of topics.
Yes, I work as a futurist, and that involves helping expand people's thinking about what the future holds. So I spend a lot of time researching all the emerging technology, and what I primarily focus on is technology-driven change. There's lots of aspects of the future that are going to be shifting and moving, but I figure if I work primarily on technology-driven change, that's one of the primary drivers right now.
Yeah, when you think about time blocks of, decades in past, and you look at when fax machines had, the thermal paper, and then now we're into all the Wi-Fi print technology that we have, just as an example, I'm sure that we can look forward and start seeing these smaller pockets of time where to get from point A to point B technology-wise, it's going to be so much faster because now the learning curve is so much less. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, it's not just the learning curve, though. It also has to do with the fact that we're transitioning from physical products to digital products. And once we add a digital component to it, then it starts taking on this exponential growth curve of change. And that's where we start seeing lots of things happening real quick. So as an example, going from a regular car to a smart car. Right now, somebody who owns a Tesla gets a monthly download on that car. So part of the sales pitch with a Tesla is that after a year, it will be a better car than when you first bought it.
Because it's learning as other users are experiencing the technology. Is that the point
right
there?
Yeah, the car is improving as it goes. It's not just each model year that some new changes get added. They get added on a monthly basis to the existing inventory.
So it's almost real time, not exact instantaneous real time, but if it is getting monthly downloads and updates and learning data, that's a pretty interesting prospect.
Well, right. So what if your refrigerator did that? What if your television did that? What if your stove, all these little things around you? I mean, our smartphones are already getting updates on a regular basis, but we have lots of traditional appliances and things. What if my electric drill suddenly got updates to it? That changes the game quite a bit.
And you think about some of these things like we mentioned the Tesla and the self-driving car technology, things like that, and I'm sure that people are rolling their eyes saying, that's just unbelievable, and I could never buy into that, and that's just, crazy talk. But I'm sure that 40 years ago, when people were talking about, having a handheld computer, called a phone that's more powerful than a desktop back in that day, they would have thought that was crazy talk. So how do you address people that really are skeptical of where the technology is right now and then how fast it can go in the very near future?
Yeah, I'm finding that there's fewer and fewer skeptics right now. That all the arguments of the past start falling by the wayside when they get proven wrong. So the change is happening, and it's so obvious. I mean, we're seeing it entering every aspect of our lives. So my wife and I go to the Consumer Electronics Show every year. And every year a friend of mine comes back, and he always says the same thing. And he always says, yeah, but there was nothing new. And and I always think, really, did you go to the same show I did?
Yeah.
But in a lot of respects, he's true. He's being accurate on this because as an example, there's thousands of TV sets on display, and every year they're a little brighter, a little flatter, little bigger screen, better battery life, more downloadable apps, and things like that. So there are all these incremental changes to it. So I often talk about how the iterators are often more valuable than the innovators, because when we have a new product that's totally new, something that's we've never even considered having part of our life in the past, once something like that comes along, we have to work our way through the crappy stages of it before we actually get to something that's really usable. Mm-hmm. And that's where the iterators, the people, the engineers that are making these seemingly minor improvements come into play, and that's a hugely valuable part of the process, because a good example of that is virtual reality right now. We're just finally getting to the stages where it's becoming really pretty good. As my friend likes to put it, he says, virtual is finally becoming reality.
It's kind of like when you mentioned your friend that said there's nothing new. If he were to not go to Consumer Electronics Show for 2 years, I'll bet he would come back after that 2-year sabbatical and be astounded, because it's almost like you start seeing these small iterations and small incremental changes, and you feel like, oh, that's no big deal. But when these big breakthroughs happen, it may be that those innovators are quietly doing it in the confines of their shop, and then they're going to only release it when you got something substantive to talk about. Whereas these days, you're getting all these developers and all these providers that are almost letting you look over their shoulder and see this iteration, and it's these pops of innovation. So I think people get sort of blinded to the small changes.
Well, right. If you would look at television 15 years ago and compare them to today, you would be totally blown away by all the differences in that type of technology. So you're absolutely right. If you wouldn't go for a few years and then suddenly go again, it would be like, wow, this has really changed.
Yep. Whereas right now you're just saying, okay, show me more. So with all of this change in technology, there's a lot of people and society would feel like, the machines are going to take our jobs, or where's the comfort in the fact that there still needs to be the human brains behind the machines, and there still is going to be the need for human interaction. So how do you respond to people that say, all of this change and innovation could eliminate so many jobs for people?
We actually had a mastermind group working on this topic for a couple months. It was on the topic of 50% unemployment. Are we actually headed towards automating display jobs out of existence, so technological unemployment, so that 50% of all the jobs go away? In fact, I predicted a few months back that by 2030, over 2 billion jobs are going to go away, which represents roughly half of all the jobs on planet Earth. After many of our discussions, we concluded that we're not going to have 50% unemployment in the world, but every individual industry will go through its own life cycle, and at times it will reach 50% unemployment. Each individual industry is going to go through radical changes. So as an example, in the 1700s, 97% of the people in the United States worked in agriculture. Now, today, that number's down around 2%. Mm-hmm. So agriculture itself has gone through several iterations of 50% unemployment.
And back then, their focus and their tunnel vision was, when they thought about jobs, they thought agriculture. So if someone said you'd have 50, 80, 90% unemployment or jobs going away, they would have said you were talking crazy talk. But now looking back on it, it's because agriculture is systematized, and now we have technology and biotech and these things, but yet their vision wasn't realized because they could never imagine that.
Right. Now, think of it this way too: that a person with a toolbox is more valuable than somebody without a toolbox. A person with a computer is more valuable than somebody without. A person with a machine or some sort of automation is more valuable than somebody without. So these are all additional tools that we're adding to our arsenal. This extends our capability exponentially. So I wrote recently a column on the 3 laws of exponential capabilities. And when something's easier to do, we just do more of it. So with all of this automation and machines and computers, what that'll do is give us the ability to accomplish much more in our lifetimes. So essentially what we need to do is set our sights much higher.
Yeah, that's and I think, like to your point a second ago, it's a lot easier for us now to imagine and comprehend and realize the technological advances because of what we've seen in the last few decades. Whereas 50, 60, 80 years ago, it was so hard to believe because you hadn't seen any tangible examples. So now if someone says, gives an example of some large technological advance, they could go, I could see that happening because of what they've seen actually come to fruition recently.
Right. So these things will give us additional capabilities. So much of our future is going to be defined by mega projects that they won't be considered mega projects in the future, but the way we look at things for today, they'll be mega projects. So,
yeah.
But yeah, there's going to be lots of jobs go away, and we're going to have people make a lot of transitions in their skills. And so we're looking at all the new opportunities for education in the future that can enable us to suddenly shift gears in our life and do something different.
So I would suspect, given the new high-tech and forward-thinking need that we're describing here, that the education system needs to keep up with that. But A, what does that look like? And B, how big of a cruise ship is it going to be for that education system to make that turn? Because it's not like it's a speedboat where it can just zip one way or the other. I think that my feeling would be the education system is going to take a little bit of time and a little bit slower to recognize these needs and then start offering programs and trainings and education to equip students with the skills to kind of be prepared for that.
One of the projections we did recently was we calculated out that somebody entering the workforce in 2030 had better be prepared to reboot their career 6 times throughout their working life. So with that in mind, somebody who has to shift gears that often will want to do the retraining in the least amount of time, not the most, which makes traditional colleges a very poor fit for that type of retraining. At the DaVinci Institute, we're experimenting with what we call a micro college. So we have our DaVinci Coders program. So we started with training people on how to do computer programming. If somebody wants to enter the tech world, this is a good entry point because there's so much demand for new talent in the coding field. So we offer 11 to 14-week programs that will help people work their way into a new career. We think that this and the idea of a micro college will get expanded into lots of different areas. Everything from teaching people how to become drone pilots, how to design parts for 3D printers, how to work with Internet of Things devices, become a data analyst. All of these things, even things like becoming a brewmaster for a brew pub, taught in a short period of time, give them enough information to shift gears in their life and be off in a new direction.
when you say micro colleges and those really specific technical training, almost certifications, do you feel that the employment culture will need to change to embrace that, because maybe they're so set in the ways of, I need a 4-year degree and hopefully a graduate degree to get XYZ job, whereas now you might have students that went to a 2-year college and then went to one of these micro specialization colleges, and they don't have the traditional 4-year degree.
Yeah, there's going to be a variety of new types of training that comes about. One of the predictions I've made is that by 2030, the largest company on the internet is going to be an education-based company that we haven't heard of yet. Now, the reason I made that prediction is because I think education is the largest opportunity online, that nobody's quite cracked the code for that yet. Now, it looked like companies like Udacity and Coursera were going in some of the right directions. They were scaling quickly. That tended to level off. And so I think the opportunity is still there. Somebody's going to figure this out. And with the scalability of the internet right now, things can just happen so fast. Let me give you an example of that. It took McDonald's 23 years to reach 1 billion hamburgers. It took Facebook 8.5 years to get to 1 billion users. It took Uber 5.5 years to sell 1 billion rides. And Uber has a competitor in China called BD Kuwati, and they got to 1 billion rides in just 11 months. And the first person to reach 1 billion downloads on YouTube was the crazy Korean pop star Psy with his Gangnam Style video. 157 days to reach 1 billion downloads. And now there's a total of 21 YouTube stars that have broken the 1 billion download level, with Adele doing it in the least amount of time of 87 days. So we have, with this ability to rapidly scale companies, people that are in business today can have a fierce competitor come up out of the woodwork, and in just like 2 weeks period of time, maybe have 10 million users, 100 million users, and they didn't know about them because they didn't even exist 2 weeks ago. That's the potential of this rapidly scaling marketplace.
Yeah, and I love the concept of that we haven't even heard of, because, like you were mentioning, there's many of these types of things that just months before they came out, you had never heard of them, but then they gain, acclaim and acceptance so rapidly because people just latch onto it. I think that's super exciting. I was reading through your article, 8 Reasons Why Over 50% of Colleges Will Fail by 2030. And I was wondering if you could comment on point 7, that you make relationships formed in colleges will be replaced with other relationship-building systems. So if we know that overhead costs are high and, substandard teachers and classes and, inconvenience of time and place and pricing, how do we then move to the relationship building and social structures that colleges do provide, and then that kind of that institutional feel?
It's a great question. If you've ever heard of the Dunbar number, Robin Dunbar is a British psychologist that calculated out that the number of tight relationships, strong bonds that a person can have in the world is around 150 people. We have limits to how much personal attention we can spend or dedicate to another person. So he's actually done some more recent studies and found that number's actually dropping. Social media makes us a bit more scattered, and so our number of strong bond relationships has actually dropped. And so that opens the door for another opportunity for somebody to figure out how do we how do we create these strong bond relationships and build on that. So we're actually doing a lot of experimenting with this whole future of work concept. At the DaVinci Institute, we have our own co-working facility, and watching the interaction between the companies that are the tenant companies there, and seeing how there's mentor relationships that develop. There's kind of student-teacher relationships. It's the ones that, if I need an answer right now, who do I go to? And so it's people get to be known as experts in the space. And people in the community that develops them, they suddenly know who to go to for every problem that they encounter. I find that to be quite fascinating.
Yeah, because that becomes relational capital.
Absolutely. And with the people and the whole interaction of these communities and how that all develops and morphs and shifts. Right now we have like 37% of our population is working as freelancers or contractors. And that number is going to go up to 40%, maybe 45% by 2020. So kind of this whole idea of getting a job and working 40 hours a week, that's kind of a thing of the past in a lot of situations. But we're not teaching people how to become freelancers either. So that's one of the big deficiencies that we have in our education system. So young people get out of college, they can't get a job. The project comes along and says, okay, I'll do that. And then another project comes along, they'll take that one on. And before they know it, they're in the lifestyle of being a freelancer. They were never trained for that. They were never thinking that that's the direction they wanted to go. They were looking for a full-time job, but they're taking the freelancer stuff because that was the next best thing. And so the freelancer lifestyle, there's lots of pluses and minuses to it. If you don't know how to manage your kind of your career path that you're taking through the freelancer world, you're going to end up in some place that you don't want to be. So somehow we need to start training people on how to manage their that type of business of you lifestyle, because they need to each treat themselves as their own business. And that's unique and different.
Yeah, it really is. It's kind of like the Internet of Things and the business of you. They should go in hand.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, there's a great speech topic there for someone. So wrapping up, what would you say is the number one hottest trend opportunity for the next 5 years that we've been talking about students and education? What should someone make sure they are getting extra training on to be prepared for upcoming trends?
Well, personally, I think everybody needs to know how to program computers. That's a basic skill that kids should learn in grade school, just like geography and history and mathematics. I think that that's permeating all of society. And so we're actually building on a digital infrastructure over everything physical in the world. And so there's virtually no jobs you can take in the future that won't have some programming happening in the background. So being at least tuned into how it works. Not everybody is designed to be a programmer, but at least have some fundamental core knowledge of that will be very helpful. As far as other skills, there's things like, just managing the technology around you, managing the distractions that you have. We're in a very distracted environments right now. How do we manage our relationships? Because there, too, we can get distracted with way too many relationships. And so how do we focus on the ones that are important? All of these things are really key components of all of this. In the sciences, there's lots of engineering stuff that's important. Material science is going to become particularly hot area with all the 3D printing, as people have figured out how to 3D print with normal waste products like used coffee grounds, or 3D printing with old macadamia nut shells and things like that. That I find absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, that really is. So that's super, super good advice. Love your points. I think we brought up some really fun points to consider. So what would be the best place where people could learn more about the DaVinci Institute?
Well, all of the things that I do are the stuff that I write are all on futuristspeaker.com. All of the programs that we're teaching with DaVinci Coders are just DaVinciCoders.com. And then the events that we have at the DaVinci Institute and the co-working, that's at DaVinciInstitute.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was great talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mike.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.